Hello, everyone. So, in this series, we're going to be learning to program in HTML using the integrated development software, Visual Studio Code. And this Visual Studio Code will help us program in HTML. And this series is taught to you by Asamani. So the first thing we should do is we go to we open up any browser we want. So in this case, I'm using Google Chrome. We search up Visual Studio Code. So when you search that up, you should get the first result you should have is code.visualstudio.com, and we go to the download section here. So this download, depending on what operating system you're on, you decide which one to download. In this case, I'm on Windows and I've already installed it. So if you haven't installed it yet, you press the button and it'll install for you. Once you install, it'll ask you to set it up. So when you set it up, you configure like things, which files you want it to be in, and other things. Okay, once you have everything set up, you should have something like this show up here. So it'll say welcome, Visual Studio Code editing evolved. So I suggest what you can do is you create a new folder for all the coding you're going to be doing. So you can go to downloads and then you can right click new folder and name it whatever you want. And so when you go to Visual Studio Code, you press open folder and the name of your folder. So in this case, I've named it coding in HTML, YouTube. And so what we do here, we press new file. And we're going to call it hello world.html. Okay, so the first thing we do in HTML is, at least a cool thing with Visual Studio Code is, you can press the exclamation mark and you press tab and it'll show the basic things you want. That's the base that you have for a normal HTML. So the title here, the title is basically what the browser is being shown. So here, for this tab, the title in HTML would be Download Visual Studio Code - Mac, Linux, and Windows. So in this case, I'm just gonna say it as my first HTML script. Okay, so how do we make text appear on the screen? So there are multiple different tags. Tags are like, see right here, this is a body tag. And the main thing with every tag is there's always two, one that starts it and one that ends it. You know which one ends it because right before it would be the same as the start tag, except it would be a slash right before it. So there's a tag called H1, which means header 1. And Visual Studio Code automatically completed the tag. I only had to put the first starting tag and it put the end tag for me. So H1 basically is like a header, the main header. So let's say first HTML script. Okay, so now how do we see if this worked? So the way we see is, first we go to File and select Save, or if you'd like, I selected Autosave so I don't have to keep pressing it, so select Autosave. And we go to the folder that you have, and you see what you see here is the Hello World, what we called it. And now let's double click on this. And look here, it opens a tab in whichever, for me it was Chrome. It will open up a tab. And right here, it says first HTML script. So that means this is working. But how do we do other things? Like, what if we want to like make this like a paragraph? What if we have a lot of text? We don't want it this big. So there's another tag called the P tag, which stands for paragraph. So you can write things like, let's say, my name is Awesome Ani, and in the place of Awesome Ani, you can put your name. Okay, now we'll go back to the my first HTML script that we've already opened, and let's reload the page. Okay, so here we should also quickly save as. I think I accidentally pressed unclicked autosave. Now we reload, and under here it'll say my name is Awesome Honey, or whatever your name is when you write the HTML script. And so what if we want to put this H1, the header, in the middle of the page? How do we do that? So what we can do is up here, right after the head tag starting, we can do something called style. So style involves something called CSS. And CSS and HTML are like a duo. You can't really do one without the other. So how do we find this H1? So we don't want everything to be centered. We only want the first H1 to be centered. So how do we only tell the H1 to move to the center? So there are three ways you could do this. One way is you could say H1, and you can put parentheses, and then you can put text align. Remember to put that dash in between, and then you put center, and then you put a semicolon afterwards. So let's see if this worked. Well, if you look at that, when you reload the page, it puts the first HTML script, the H1, in the center. But there are other ways to do it as well. So what if I have multiple H1s? Like, let's add another H1 saying, let's say, English is my language. So, or you could say whatever language you speak. So I speak English, so I'm gonna put English as my language. But when I reload the page, I don't want English as my language to be centered. I want it to be still over here on the left-hand side. So how do I only make the first HTML script one of them? Like the only one that's moving. So what we can do is we can do something called give it an ID. So an ID, it has to be a string, which means it has to be like some letters or numbers, depending on what you want. So let's say our ID is first. So how do we go up to the style and only refer to the one with the ID of first? What we can do is we can put a hashtag, and then we can go first. This, you don't have to put quotation marks around this because it will automatically look for a string, because all IDs have to be a string, which means it's letters or numbers inside of a quotation mark. So let's see if this did what we wanted it to. So we'll reload the page. And as you see, the only thing that is that's only in the center, the only thing in the center is this first HTML script, because we use the ID. So what if we wanted, what if we had three H1s, but we only wanted two of them to be in the center? So let's just define quickly another H1, and we'll put it as I am coding. I am coding. Put an exclamation mark. So what if we wanted two of these H1s, let's say the first HTML script and the I am coding. What if we wanted two of them to go, but we didn't want the English is my language to go to the center? The way we can do this is defining something called a class. A class is basically like an ID, except the class can be defined for multiple tags. So we could say this H1 class the class, let's just say, is HTML, or yeah, we'll call it HTML, and then we'll give this the same class, HTML. And then what if we give this P the class HTML? Okay, so how do we change this hashtag first to to make the class HTML go in to the text align centered, to make all of them centered? Well, the way we define a class is using dot, and then the name of the class, HTML. So here we see that this .html is not showing any errors. So let's go back to the HTML running in Chrome or whatever browser you're using. Well, if you see here, now all three of them are centered. The only one that isn't centered is the English is my language. But all of these tags have been defined, and they've been centered. They've been defined in the code, but they've also been defined in the CSS to be centered. Okay, well, what other tags are there? Well, there are other tags like H1, like H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. All of them are headers. It's just that they aren't as big as the H1 because that's the biggest header. It's the main header. So let's just say hello in H2, and then H3, we can say hello in H3, and then when we go to H4, we can say hello, and then same thing with H5. Then H6. And that's it. There is no H7. But let's just go here, and we see, and when we reload the page, we can see that English is my language is header 1. Hello in like header 2 is big, but not as big as header 1. And then same thing with header 3. It's smaller than header 2. Header 4 is smaller than header 3. Header 5 is smaller than header 4, and header 6 is the smallest of all of them. And so these headers, depending on what you're doing on your website, can you do different things. So if you wanted to publish a blog website where you're like saying your experiences, let's say you went on a trip to Mexico and you went to the beach and you want to publish a website like with your photos, and you want to go to the beach, like what you did at the beach, like how warm the water was, all what you're doing, that would most likely involve an H1 as like your first centered thing, saying that our beach experience. That could be something that you could say, and then instead of using all of these headers here, these headers right here, you can use a paragraph tag here and then just write and like type what you experienced. So that's the biggest thing about HTML. Like, you are able to code something and it can be shared with the entire world and all your experiences. So that is the introduction to HTML, how to install Visual Studio Code, and also programming our first line of HTML and CSS. In the next video, we're going to be discussing some more tags that we can use for our websites, and other things within CSS as well, based on those tags. Stay tuned for the next video in the series by Asamani, and hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.